Hey, so this week is all about audio recording. So I've got a bunch of kit over here. A lot of it is audio stuff, and we also have the camera kit that you're semi-used to using by now. The Canon XF605 with us here. So I'm going to show you how to set up audio both directly into camera and also recording to a separate audio recording device known as a Tascam. So I'll start by showing you this bag actually. This here is the Tascam bag. On top here we have a set of radio mics. I'm also wearing one on my t-shirt right now, but this set of radio mics will allow you to record audio kind of wirelessly, I suppose. So it's directly being received by the receiver, which is one of these, and being sent by the transmitter. That means that you can have them on actors or on presenters more likely, actually, than actors. And it means they're free to roam around without having to be followed by a boom pole or without having to hold their own presenter microphone. This here we have, I'm sure some of you know what this is, a boom pole. I'll extend that out fully later and also show you some boom pole techniques. We also have here a boom mic, which actually has several names. Rifle mic, gun mic, mostly gun related stuff really. This top part here in America is known as a wind jammer. But over here in the UK, we colloquially refer to it as a dead cat for obvious and quite sad reasons. I'll show you how to kind of get the best audio out of this. It is what's known as a directional microphone, but as I say, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we have the standard cable that we use for audio most of the time, which is a 3-pin cable known as an XLR cable. So without further ado, I'm going to set the camera kit up. I may well fast forward the video at this point. It's a good idea to keep neat and tidy, so I'm going to stick that tripod bag back in the trolley. That's kind of rule number one on set, out on location. Keep things neat, tidy. Don't want to lose things, don't want things to get damaged by people trampling over them or anything like that. Now don't forget, it's usually best to open the bottom set of locks first on the tripod because it makes raising the tripod up later much easier. It's much easier to adjust the height on the fly when the top locks are just nice and easy to get to here. Slide the camera on from the back. Okay, trusty SD card. It's a good idea to put lens caps back in the bag as well. There's 2 removable lens caps on this camera, one on the back and one, which I suppose isn't a lens cap, it's more of an eyepiece cap really. Now before I go any further, there are a few settings on the camera that we haven't yet covered in workshop, so I'd like to go through some of those with you. So if I just press menu here, this screen is also touchscreen by the way, so you can get to things by touching, but I find it a little bit fiddly. One thing I want you to do, or get into the habit of doing every time you come onto the camera, is go over to this system setup and hit reset, and then go all settings. This essentially resets the camera back to its factory defaults, which means that if any student before you has messed around with some of the settings, it gets rid of those things they've messed around with and starts from the same base every time. So assuming you do this every time, you should know now which settings you need to go and check. Cameras will also always ask you to reset the date when they first turn back on. You'll notice the camera turned off and back on again then. I tend to just flick straight through this because it's not that important, to be honest. And now we can go back into the menu and look for some other things. So we've reset all the settings. Next thing we want to do is format our media card, and that one is in this recording/media setup menu. So the third one along from the left. Go into that. Initialize media, that's the same thing as format card. You'll often see it called different things on different cameras from different brands. Select whichever SD card slot your SD card is in. If you have 2 SD cards, you'll probably need to do it for both of these and hit OK. It's probably worth me noting that before you do that on a proper film set, you always should ask permission from whoever's in charge of backing up that footage to make sure they've definitely got a backup before you format your card, because formatting your card deletes all the footage. And then a secondary thing is it creates folder structure that this camera recognizes on the SD card, so it knows where to save data. So you really need to get into the habit of doing those 2 things at the start of every single shoot. And the next thing you want to do is to go to, again, it's in recording media/setup, and this time we're going to select our resolution and frame rate. The default resolution, oops, damn touchscreen. The default resolution for this camera is 3840 by 2160, which is 4K. There are some instances where you might like to shoot in 4K, but the default for television production is still 1080 and 50i. We'll cover in a bit more detail what 50i means another time, but for now just know that if in doubt, to go main resolution and click 1920 by 1080. I keep forgetting it's touchscreen. 1920 by 1080, so that middle option there, intra frame, is your best bet. And then frame rate, come here and go 50i. That's all the camera settings I need to show you. Now we can go on to audio setup. Okay, so this Canon XF605 has 2 XLR inputs, which is fairly standard for this sort of video camera. We use an XLR cable that looks something like this. It's a 3-pin cable, and we have the pins and the holes. They can daisy chain to link up with each other. So if you have sort of multiple cables and you want to reach really far, they will click into each other like so. Just note there is a release catch here. So anytime you want to release an XLR cable, you need to ensure you're pressing that, or the camera actually has them here as well. So make sure when you're releasing, you're holding that in and not just trying to yank cables out. We're going to put the pins into the holes here. Just pay attention to which input you're going into. So I don't know if you can see there, it says input 1 and input 2. This is going to be important later on when we tell the camera where those inputs are going to. So as a default, I usually just use input 1 to begin with. If I have a second mic, I'll use input 2. Once we've plugged into here, we need to come around and take a look at these settings. These settings refer to different types of input and also whether they need power supplied from the camera's battery along the cable to the microphone. So let's first of all begin with line. A line input is something that doesn't need amplifying anymore when it gets to the camera. Microphones, so the middle option here, they have lower signal input than a line input would, and so they need amplifying when they get to camera. This one over here is also mic, but this is plus 48V, which stands for volts. This means you're providing power to the microphone that's plugged in. In the case of the rifle microphone that we're going to use today, we need that switched on. If you're ever in doubt, by the way, whether your input is a line or a mic input, if you're finding that the signal sounds kind of like way too loud, no matter how much you turn the levels down on your camera, it's probably a line input and you've got it switched to mic. In which case, switch it to line and that will reduce that problem. We have the same here for input 2 as well, the same options. Obviously we've got nothing plugged into input 2 right now, so it doesn't matter what we put that one on. I'm going to go ahead and grab the rifle mic now. There is a small XLR cable that goes from this mic here into this handle section, which makes it a little bit easier to plug in. We can just plug straight into there. If you ever wanted to release this mic, just drop that down there for a second, we can simply pull it out of the handle and hold it like this. You may well have seen news reporters in the past holding microphones like that. And we could just plug our cable directly into there if we wanted to. That's supposed to be kind of wobbly like that, by the way. That's to stop vibration passing through the handle. And then I'm going to plug the whole end into the pin end here. And it should go in with a little click. There we go. Okay, so that microphone is now plugged into input 2. I'll pop that down there for a second. Once we've done that, we're going to need to go into our menu and make sure we know where that input is actually being recorded to. And we'll have to do that for any input that we plug in. Always check that it's definitely being recorded to the channels that you expect it to be recorded to. On the right hand side here, we see the channels. It might be quite hard for you to see that, but at the bottom there it says 1, 2, 3, 4, and there are 4 bars jumping up and down, which show you how high the levels being recorded are for each of those channels. So this camera records 4 channels as a default. If we go into the menu, we can navigate across to our audio menu. So it's the 4th from the left, and we go audio input selection to determine where this input is now going to be recorded to. Once you've done a factory reset, you'll see here that both channel 1 and channel 2 and channel 3 and channel 4 are all set to be built-in microphones. This camera does have 2 built-in microphones at the front of it. As I tap these, you'll see these levels going up and down. So at the moment, all the audio is coming through those 2 microphones at the front, which is not what we want. So for channel 1 and channel 2, I'm going to click on built-in mic and change that to input terminals. This now confirms input 1 and input 2 and mic plus 48, which is confirming that we have got the phantom power switched on input 1 there. So that's perfect, that's exactly what we want. I would suggest for channel 3 and channel 4, I'm just going to leave them as the inbuilt microphones here, because then I have a backup sound source just in case something goes wrong with my main microphone. Push the switch in to confirm that before pressing cancel to come out of the menu. You'll now see that there's a couple of other options that have been ungrayed that we can now look at. So now we can choose what our channel 2 is. At the moment, I've got nothing in channel 2. So if you like, you could put that on built-in microphone. However, for this workshop soon, I will be plugging something into input 2. So actually I'm going to go back, leave that on input 2, and just remember, at the moment, nothing's recorded to it, but later on there will be. You can now see the levels here. I don't know how well you can see that, but I can clearly see that there's levels on channel 1. They will jump up and down when I tap this microphone. There's nothing on channel 2. No matter how much sound I make, channel 2 is not moving at all now. Channel 3 and 4 are the two microphones at the front of the camera. So that's a basic way of setting up your audio levels. The way I just tested those microphones, by the way, is the preferred way of doing it. You might see people going testing, 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 or speaking into one microphone. The problem with that is, as you can see, all the levels are bouncing up and down as I'm speaking into this microphone. So the only way to isolate the sound on one mic is to tap that microphone, as we saw previously. This is one of our radio mic sets. So if I just open that up, first of all, that is the microphone. Pay attention to how this is packed away, by the way, because you notice how this is coiled nicely. It needs to be coiled nicely like that at the end. We don't want tangles. We don't want it just chucked around all over the place. And we definitely don't want it risking getting caught in the edges of the box like that. So always pack things away as you find them. If I just unravel that, we've got this very tiny microphone here, which is called a tie clip or a lavalier or a lapel mic. So it has a few names. This is also an omnidirectional microphone, which means it can pick up sound equally in all directions, but it only has a very tight pickup pattern, which means you want to get it quite close to the sound source. This end is a mini jack connection, and it also has this screw wheel here, so we'll have to actually screw it into place once it's plugged into the transmitter, which I'll show you in a second. We have a selection of other cables. So this is mini jack to mini jack, which is kind of like more of like a consumer input. And then we have mini jack to XLR, which is what we're going to be using today. This thing is not a vape. It's actually a wireless receiver that can plug straight into the bottom of either like a presenter's microphone or a rifle microphone, which means that you don't have cables trailing from the camera. So that's really handy. These two boxes that look identical at a quick glance are actually not identical. If I turn them up like that, you'll see there's a difference on top. One of them says mic and has a mute switch. So this is where our microphone is going to get connected. This is the transmitter. It transmits via radio waves to the receiver, assuming they have the same frequency set, which I'll show you how to do that in a moment. First things first, we can actually plug that microphone into the top, and as I mentioned before, turn that silver dial until it's screwed in. This is so that if something yanks on this, it's less likely to just suddenly come out halfway through recording. We can turn this on by undoing this flap. It's got two buttons on the side here, like that. So you just squeeze those buttons and it sort of pops open. It takes 2 AA batteries. If these run out when you're on campus, pop to the kit desk and they'll give you another couple. Alternatively, if you're out on location, just go and buy some AA batteries, because the last thing you want is for your batteries to run out while you're recording. That'd be a right pain. Here is the battery level. So at the moment, this is full. If you see that go down to 1 bar of battery and you're recording like a long 1-hour interview or something, don't risk it, just change the batteries. Okay, so that's ready to be clipped onto someone in a moment. I'll do the same with the receiver pack, turn that on. And the first thing we want to check straight away is that the 2 numbers on the front of the screen, I'll just press that so that you can actually see that again, are matching. So we've got 606.875 on the transmitter, 606.875 on the receiver. They should be matching if they've come straight from the kit desk, because the kit desks tend to reset them to a set list of frequencies that we're allowed to use on campus. You'll notice it says mute here at the moment. That's because this mute switch on top is switched to mute. We'll unmute that. Now, because I've unmuted, we can see there are levels jumping up and down on the side here. That is coming from this microphone. Again, we can do the test. As I tap that, there's a slight delay, but you can see the levels jumping up and down there. That tells me that this microphone is connected correctly. It doesn't tell me that there's no problem with the cable and that there's no rustling on the audio or anything like that, no interference, but it does tell me that at least the mic is definitely connected to the transmitter correctly. To test that the receiver is receiving, we do the same thing. So this one is not connected to the microphone, this is loose, and it's hopefully receiving. I'll just turn that on for you so you can see that. We can see the levels jumping up and down there when I tap that microphone again. So great, we know that that microphone is working as far as getting to the transmitter, and that the transmission is being received by the receiver. The final thing in terms of setting this up, at least in terms of these parts, is that we want to set how sensitive this microphone is to the levels that are being picked up. So if we go into the menu again by pressing that set button, we can toggle through and we go to sensitivity. Now audio is measured in decibels, but it's measured in minus numbers. So 0 would be louder than say -10, for example. Here we have -27 decibels, which is probably about average for how most people talk in terms of their level. If you've got quite a loud talker or there's someone projecting their voice like I am now, I might go to -30 or even -33 decibels. But really this is a bit of trial and error. You put this microphone on the person, so it needs to be exactly where it's going to be when you're recording the audio. And then you set this and check. So as they're talking, I'll put this close to my mouth now. As I'm talking at a certain level, you want to check that that's not peaking, which means the levels are not hitting the very top of that scale there. Just to show you what that would look like, I'm going to go in and turn the sensitivity up. So don't forget it's minus numbers. So -9 is now going to be quite loud. You can already see this light here is flashing. This is my AF peak light. So this is telling me when the audio is peaking, which is not a good thing. We do not want that light to be flashing. You can see here now the levels are right up high on that bar on the side. And every time it peaks, it's going to distort the audio and make a right mess. We always allow what's called headroom in audio terms for someone to sort of maybe hysterically laugh or suddenly start talking a bit louder. We want to give that a little bit of headroom for them to do that. We can always boost the audio levels slightly in post-production if we need to. I'll go over to the camera now and show you how this setup works in camera. Okay, so when it comes to the receiver, we need to plug this mini jack connection into here. And on this occasion, the other end of that cable is an XLR cable. Don't forget that there is a mini jack to mini jack cable if you need that for the camera that you're using as well. This receiver can get clipped over the handle here because there's not really anywhere else to put it. I'll warn you that this can be a little bit fiddly because the clip for this is like really strong, so you've got to sort of like bend it out to get it over that. The XLR cable now can go into input 2. So now we've got a rifle microphone on input 1 and a radio mic on input 2, and because we've got 4 channels we can still have our inbuilt microphones on channel 3 and channel 4. So I'll go into the menu. We've got audio input selection that we need to check first of all. Input 1 is our rifle microphone, which is on channel 1. Don't forget there's difference between inputs and channels. Inputs are things coming in, channels are where the audio gets recorded. And input 2 is being recorded to channel 2. So to double check that whilst we're in that menu, the same way we did with the other microphones, I'm going to tap this. And you can hopefully see clearly there that channel 2 is jumping up and down when I tap it. And none of the other channels are, which is great. That means that's working correctly. Okay, at this point we have all the microphones attached that we need, so I'm now going to spin the camera around and plug in a set of headphones. So you may well have noticed that you can actually set levels near enough without wearing headphones, because what you're doing is actually looking on the screen to check how loud things are being recorded. But I would always suggest listening as well, because although something might be recorded at the right level, that's not to say there won't be a crackling on the channel or a buzz or something like that. There might be a problem with the cable that you don't notice unless you wear headphones. So plug your headphones into here. You'll need to bring your own headphones to the workshop, please, and then have a little listen. Now we need to come around here, so I'll spin that around again, and actually set the levels. So it's really important when you set levels that the microphone is in position where it's going to be when you're actually recording audio. That might sound like an obvious thing to do, but I have seen students in the past setting levels when the microphone is like 5 meters away, and then put the microphone in close and they think, oh, it's really loud all of a sudden now. Sounds really obvious, but don't make that mistake. So under this flap here is our sort of final audio options. We have channel 1, all this top stuff here, and channel 2 down the bottom here. For each channel, we have the option to select automatic or manual. This determines whether the camera is setting levels for us or whether we're doing it ourselves. If we're doing it ourselves, that's when these dials here come into play. So if you've got any of your audio inputs selected to manual, you will need to set levels yourself with this dial. I'm going to go ahead and switch both of them to manual. There are times when you might want to just switch to automatic if you're not able to monitor levels yourself, but in an ideal world you switch to manual because what you don't want is the levels going up and down all the time. You may well want to stay in this menu option here when you do this because it's actually much easier to see your levels as opposed to going back out and just watching them on the camera screen. But if the rifle microphone is going to be this distance away, we can see here that the levels are reaching the very top of that level bar just for input 1. We see that little red blip appearing at the very end of that channel. That means the levels are being recorded too loud. If this microphone is going to be this close to my mouth when you're recording levels, you're going to need to turn that down. And if we were listening through headphones right now, it would sound distorted and horrible. It would sound too loud. So just on channel 1, I'm going to slowly turn this dial. You need to get your presenter or actor, whoever it is, to continuously talk at the level they're going to be talking at during the interview or during the scene while you do this. And I'm just going to keep turning that down until we're no longer peaking. And you probably want your audio landing around about minus 10 decibels, which hopefully you can see there's a little minus 10. As long as you're not peaking, you're not at risk of peaking, and you're giving yourself a bit of headroom, but you're also not recording too quietly. That's the key. That's roughly where you want to be. I would go ahead and do the same for channel 2 with your radio mic. Make sure it's in position where it needs to be. Set levels with that manually, and then you can leave them. That's the general idea of setting levels in camera. I've been expecting you. Okay, so here we've got a boom pole and the rifle microphone. If you want to use the boom pole, you will have to have the microphone on this handle. It comes as that as standard, so that's no problem. We can attach on the bottom of this handle here, we've got an XLR cable attachment and a thread for this boom pole to go into. So I'm going to thread that into there. This can be quite tricky. That's my preferred technique, is to sort of roll it through my fingers, or you can kind of spin this around and keep the boom pole still, whichever you prefer. Make sure that's on there nice and tight. You don't want anything wobbling around. You'll notice that I don't currently have the XLR cable connected to the end of this because it tends to be easier to set this up first without the cable being on. Now there's a little bit of knack to this. I don't know if you want to come in a little bit closer, Roz, to see this, because each of these here extends the section of pole that's inside here at the moment. This pole can actually go to about 3 meters in length, I think, something along the lines of that. You'll notice here I have to hold the grip, so the handle to begin with, and turn this bottom one. That will allow me to slide that section of pole out there, okay? That's not fully extended, by the way. I'm just showing you right now how we extend each section. Make sure you tighten off that one before you do the next one. And now I'm going to hold this section of pole here to loosen off the next one. Extend that outwards like that, and then tighten off that ring. You notice I'm still gripping this section of pole. I can go on to the next section of pole and do the same thing until eventually you have each section of pole showing. And that's actually a good way to use the boom pole, even if you only need it extended like that far. It's better to have each section out so that you can easily grab hold of a section of pole and tighten one of these if you need to. Yeah, it's really difficult to sort of tighten one of these if you can't grab the section of pole below it. So that's basically how you extend a boom pole. And if you want to, I can show you just how long this boom pole actually goes. You need to be quite careful with microphones once they're on boom poles, that there's no risk of them sort of falling over, because that is how long it is. Pretty long, I think you'll agree. This is the usual technique that people use when operating a boom pole. You may have seen this in films. There's a good reason for that. That is because when we film in rectangular frames, which have a straight edge along the top. And you'll notice my boom pole here is horizontal and would go along the top edge of my frame and allow me to get the microphone nice and close to my subject. The sort of #1 rule of recording audio is get your microphone close to the sound source to pick up the best audio possible. This will allow you to lower your levels, which basically means the noise to signal ratio is lower. What you don't want to do is be really far away from your subject, raise your levels, which means you pick up all the background noise as well. Get your microphone nice and close and lower your levels for best audio recording. Now, I've been here for probably less than a minute like this and my arms are already aching. That's just one of the kind of realities of being a boom swinger. What you can do is rest it on your head like this, and you can sort of use this back arm over here as a counter lever, Sometimes you'll see people going across the shoulders, but of course that's a bit of a problem because the boom pole is now a lot lower and could easily be in shot. The one thing we do want to avoid really is just booming like this, because it's easy for that edge of the pole to be caught in the corner of the frame of shot. There is another way of booming. You can come from underneath, but it all depends on the frame that's being shot and whether that can be hidden or not. Of course, you almost always want to hide your boom pole, unless you're going for that sort of behind the scenes look. I'm going to leave that there a second and actually grab the XLR cable, because there is something I want to show you about that as well. Our XLR cable can now plug into the underside here. And then there's a little trick to ensure that the cable, if that cable was going off running to our camera now, of course that cable is likely to be dangling right in the middle of our shot, which is a big problem. So ideally you have a slightly longer XLR cable than this, because they've given me a bit of a short one here right now. But we hold it up like that, spin the boom pole around, and you notice we get this sort of barbershop sign kind of effect as the cable twirls around the pole. And that is a nice neat boom pole that's not going to dangle into shot. This end can then go off to your camera. If you needed to, you could daisy chain another XLR cable straight into that one if the camera's a bit further away. And in a moment, I'm going to show you that we can also use these with external audio recording devices such as Tascams. So that means you don't even need to be tethered to the camera. Win-win. Fantastic. We'll leave that there. I'm tired. The other way you can use these radio mics, as I mentioned earlier, is to use them handheld and wireless. So this is a wireless transmitter designed for this rifle mic. This can plug straight into the bottom, line the pins and the holes up, pushes in, and there's also a little twisty, what do we call that? Thread that you can tighten up there to make sure that doesn't slip off while you're using it. On the bottom of this, I don't know if you can see that from where you are, but there are some very small buttons. There's an on-off button, which you simply hold down for a moment to turn on. There's a set button and a couple of arrows. So these are what we're going to do to navigate through the menus. Okay, so this dial here is pretty much exactly the same as the transmitter pack that we used previously. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but again, if we press set, we can see a sensitivity option here. We can use the arrows now to navigate through that menu if we want to go to something else. But on the sensitivity one, press set again, and we can change how sensitive this mic is to the audio that's coming in. So the same process, just make sure the mic is where it's going to be when you're recording the audio. If you're using this as a sort of presenter or journalist's mic, generally speaking, it wants to be maybe 30 centimeters or something like that away from your mouth. Don't put these really close to your mouth like you would a singer's microphone, for example. I can show you roughly. I would probably hold it something like this if I was going to be talking. So you don't want to be doing this because these mics are quite sensitive. By the way, these microphones are known as directional microphones because they pick up sound best directly down the tube there. That's the actual microphone. That's what it looks like. This part can come off if you're shooting indoors because this is just to protect from wind noise. Directional microphones pick up most, as I say, from the front and very little from the back, so you can position yourself in such a way that any noise, like maybe traffic from a busy road, is behind you and your subject is stood here. That will mean that they are nice and loud and the background noise over there is not so loud. Once you've set this up, and again exactly the same as on the other transmitter, you want to check that the frequency matches the receiver pack. So this transmitter will connect to the same receiver pack that we had before on the camera over here, this one here. So it needs to match the frequency on there. And then other than that, the setup process is exactly the same. Now I'm going to show you how to use the Tascams as a separate audio recording device, which means we will not be recording straight to camera, which will mean that in post-production in your edit, you'll need to sync the audio with the video because it won't be synced automatically as it is in camera. I should mention that this microphone, because there's no way of providing power to this now, you can't provide power from this, it does have a battery slot inside it here. Let me unwind this and show you that. I probably should have said that at the start, but it's all right, isn't it? We'll get there eventually. This part of the microphone unwinds, and you can see in there, there's a single AA battery. Okay, finally then, I'm going to just quickly show you the Tascam setup. A Tascam is a separate audio recording device that looks like this. This one is called a Tascam DR40. This will allow your boom operator to be kind of separate from the camera, so you're not tethered by a cable to the camera. Instead, the cable from your microphone, whatever microphone you happen to be using, will be plugged into the bottom here. So these are XLR inputs like we've seen on previous devices, on the camera, for example. This Tascam comes with a little kind of small XLR cable. We can go into either of these. I tend to always plug into the left or into input 1 first. That's just the way I like to work. This kit also comes with its own little presenter microphone. Now this microphone can get a little bit closer to the mouth. It's a little bit of a tighter pickup pattern than the rifle microphone was, so you don't have to hold it really low. This one can be closer. I would also say, by the way, that you can use the rifle microphone with this Tascam. Anything that can be connected via XLR cable like that can be recorded straight into here. I'll show you with this microphone just because it's in my hand right now. Plug that onto the end there. The Tascam turns on with the on-off button here, which is also a stop button. So just hold that down for a couple of seconds. It should light up. Give it a moment while it loads. Straight away it asks me, phantom on, are you sure? I'm going to say yes, because we may well need phantom power on whichever microphone we're using. That means the power is coming from this Tascam and is powering the microphone. Tascams are fairly simple to use. I would suggest the first thing you do is go into the menu, navigate all the way down to others, and then all the way down again to system, and finally initialize. This is the same thing as resetting the camera that we did earlier. It's going to mean that any settings that people have been messing around with are reset back to factory defaults. The next thing you're going to want to do is a quick format. Okay, so that's everything reset. The camera card is now formatted. This button on the right hand side here is the record mode button, which we're going to have to press. You can see the text has rubbed off there, so we can't see it that clearly. But if I press that, you'll see some different options here for record mode and for source. The source is kind of important here because we need to know what microphone we're actually recording from onto this Tascam. The record mode can stay as mono. I'll just show you there are other options as well. Stereo, dual, 4-channel, overdub. There's lots of settings there. We're not going to go into all of those right now. Mono is a really good option for you. You'll notice I've gone back to mono and that's now defaulted to internal mic mono. In this case, we don't want to record through the internal mic. This is known as an external microphone because it's external to the device. So if we go across to that, press up 1, we see EXT in 1. EXT stands for external. So if I just press the record mode button again, actually no I don't, I press the stop button. Comes back out to the main menu there. Hitting record on a Tascam or most audio recording devices actually arms the recording. You can see the light here is flashing right now. This is sort of like a pre-record, so don't ever fall into the trap of thinking that's recording. You have to hit the record button again to record. But before we do that, because I've now armed the recording, we'll be able to see levels bouncing up and down on screen, assuming the levels are high enough. These buttons on the side here, input level, we have a plus and a minus. These allow us to adjust our levels. So I'm going to keep hitting, I'm going to hold down the plus button there while I'm tapping the microphone, and you can see levels now bouncing up and down on screen. Of course, the real levels that we need is how loud this is when someone's talking into it. In the position it's going to be when they're actually talking when you hit record on your camera or for whatever production you're doing. So I'm now going to hold the microphone nice and close to my mouth while I'm talking. We can see a little notch here about 3/4 of the way up our level bar. That's the notch we should be aiming for. That is probably minus 10 decibels, which is usually the kind of value that we aim for when we're recording audio. When I record at a normal level, occasionally it goes a little bit above that. Occasionally it's a little bit quieter than that. I think I'll come down slightly just to give myself that headroom, and that should be roughly right. I've set levels well there. Now when I'm ready to record, hit the record button again, and the telltale sign that you're definitely recording is that these numbers here are going up. We've recorded for 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 7 seconds, etc. When you're ready to stop, just hit the stop button and it creates a new file every time you hit record again. Don't forget, you have to hit record twice if you actually want to start recording. Do not fall into that trap.